van! You hear it?
It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations in the electric current, which are directly proportional to the variations in the light beam. The sound track. As the varying electrical current in the photoelectric cell is small, a vacuum tube amplifier is required to increase it to the point where it will operate a loudspeaker. Sound track.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Occult Rejects. As you can see this week, we still got Robby Marx with us. We will be continuing this series. As far as we know, I think this will be 3 parts. So there will be another part next week. I guess real quick, I would like to introduce Robby again, in case people don't know who he is. He's been on my show, the NY Patriot show, numerous times, and I guess last week was his debut on the Occult Rejects. But in case you don't know who he is again, Robby, would you like to tell everybody who you are, what you're about, and where they can find all your amazing stuff?
Sure, thanks. I'm out there. If you just Google RMarx, M-A-R-X artist, I should come up. I'm on pretty much all the major platforms. And then I also as well have the Meta Mindcast, M-E-T-T-A Mindcast, and I'm on most of the pod servers, Apple, Spotify. I'm out there.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And all his links will be in the bottom, his art and his podcast. All of that will be in the bottom. And I'm also accompanied by my co-host from Canada, Teresa. What's going on? I know most people probably know you from my show, but you have been on the Occult Rejects once, if not twice. I don't know why I can't remember.
Yeah, a couple times.
I think twice,
maybe.
yeah. So.
Depends on what's come out yet.
Everything's out now. So anything's coming. Okay. Anything that was out before this, it's all been neither old stuff or repeats. But, you have been on the Occult Rejects before. Would you like to let everybody know what's up with you and your show in case they don't know who you are?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me on the show. So I'm Teresa. I'm from Canada. And I have another show also co-hosted with you called The Spiritual Gangsters, which is a little bit different than this one. So
for sure.
Please check it out. You might like it. We just have cool chats with cool people. So good stories about transformation and personal challenges, and it's a good time.
Yes. I think it's a good show you don't have to hurt your brain to listen to it.
No, exactly.
You know what I'm saying? But you can still get something out of it as well.
It's definitely for conspiracy-minded people, like awake and aware people, but it's like a nice calming show you can just have on in the background, like while you're doing stuff. Yeah. You don't have to be like paying too much attention. It's a good conversational show.
Yes, I agree. Of course I'm on it, so I'm going to say I like it. Anyway.
Right? Yeah, then we have to get Robby on there soon.
Yes.
Yeah,
I had mentioned that to him before. Yeah, I would really like to get him on that.
Awesome.
And I guess just real quick, just to kind of do a little bit of a recap, if you didn't catch the last week's, Robby did go over Osiris and what was it? Isis and Osiris, correct?
Yeah, last week we started with the Egyptian creation and then brought that into Isis and Osiris. Yes. And now we're going to continue on Osiris and then move into Set and Nephtys. Awesome. And then we're going to cover Thoth, and then we're going to cover the mystery as far as the Osirian mystery and how that kind of parses out and brings us into the future.
Thank you very much, sir. So, check out the last episode if you did not catch this one. And I guess, Robby, wherever you want to take us, however you want to start this off.
So we were talking about Osiris last time, and the reason I couldn't find my notes was because they were with my set notes. So, because they are essentially like the yin and yang.
I was going to say, aren't they kind of almost, again, not to go back to Janus, but that could be easily show just dualism.
The faces. Yeah.
Yeah. Two opposite ends.
Oh yeah. The
Are
pole.
they considered brothers in
Yes,
Egyptian
they are
mythology?
brothers.
Okay.
Now Isis, Osiris, Set, and Nephtys are all brothers and sisters.
Gotcha.
So I guess it was Geb and Nut, not looking back, but I'm pretty sure it was Geb and Nut that basically are the sky and the earth that gave birth to these 4 siblings.
Can you take Geb and Nut back to Nu and Nuit as well?
Yeah,
are they like the same thing almost?
I've got a whole flow chart here. So let's see, we go from the 8, the Ogdoad, as far as those frog entities that we talked about in the chaos, right? And then that comes down to Amun and Atun, and then they give birth to Shu and Tefnut, which are air and moisture, and then earth and sky, being Geb and Nut, give birth to Isis, Osiris, Set, and Nephtys.
All right.
So you have this series of, and it's almost like coming from the manifestation of the light from the chaos, right? And then it almost folds down, like settling into more dense form, as far as and then bringing forth that first those first God forms on Earth that were human in quality, So it kind of echoes in this settling in,
Yeah, it's like the Greek pantheon. You got Gaia, and then what was it, Uranus, and then they had Zeus, and like the physical, like you said, human-like gods, right?
Yeah, and he was stolen away and put in a cave, always with the cave, So
have you ever noticed, like when you check out these gods and like follow them, like you're saying, going from like who created who and going down? Have you ever noticed that like the higher you go, the more, I guess, broad of who these gods were, and then as you go down, they almost literally start getting more personalized as to people here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. Sure.
Totally.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, my correction. Zeus's parents are Kronos and Rhea. My bad.
Oh, you better make sure somebody comment.
Uranus and Gaia. So again, it is like the ethereal, and then coming more to like a dense form. Exactly.
Dense form, right.
Yeah.
And then we take that God that's just above where we are in density, and basically he gets slain and put into the most compact form of that black cube at the center of the earth, So now, getting it back to Osiris, right? The oldest depiction we have is from 2300 BC. So, and that story we were saying that Egypt basically goes back. I think it's 700,000 years, right? Is when Egypt was first occupied, and that's the same time as roughly the Neanderthals were around. Right. So, but then it wasn't up until 2300 BC. So roughly, 4,000 to 5,000 years ago that we get our first representation that we have record of, at least, from Egypt. And in Egyptian, Osiris's name is Usur, is how it's pronounced. Right. And it eventually, through Greek mystery, the Greeks go into the mysteries, and all the culture translation became what we now know as Osiris, right? And that meant the Usur meant powerful and mighty, right? And now Osiris was originally a fertility god, and he absorbed the qualities of these two characters. There's a fertility temple in Abydos, right? And these two entities called Angeti and Kehen-Timinti. And he basically absorbed their qualities of fertility of the lands. And that's where he got his fertility qualities that we now personified through Osiris, as far as the plant, the growing of the plants and the fertile soil, basically going back to that chem, right? And let's see. So as the judge of the dead, okay, so yeah, he took on there was another entity that he took on the quality of, which was Anpu, right? Who was a jackal psychopomp that basically guided the pharaohs into the underworld, right? And at a certain point, when Osiris became the god of the dead after he's murdered and basically turned into a mummy, which we'll get into later, he absorbs those qualities of that jackal god, right? And basically becomes the judge of the dead. And that jackal god that was Anpu becomes Anubis. So that's where we get Anubis, right? And let's see. Now, living his life as a man, he was always in royal dress. He wore the crown of Upper Egypt, and then he held the crook and the flail, right? Which those two symbols we see. And in Egyptian, the crook was called the Heka, which is, I find interesting because that's magic, right? And then the flail was called the Nekhakha. So, and they represented the kingship, the crook did, and then the flail represented the fertility of the land. So they're basically, and he's basically the good shepherd that, guides the flock. Very much like we see this shepherd symbology coming up over and over and over. And you almost have to wonder how much that has to do with the shepherd kings,
Absolutely. That's interesting.
So let's see. Now the crook, as far as, and it's basically a pole with like a loop on the end, almost like the shepherd's staff that you see, right? Except for a little shorter.
It's like the same thing that Moses carried, maybe.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah,
I guess
yeah.
depends on how.
Well, and Moses coming out of Egypt and those links intricately in, with his upbringing. So now that was essentially for the shepherd. That was to catch, and so you could like put the loop around their head and catch them, or you could like kind of tap on them and guide them, get them to use it as a tool. And I have a stick that I use out with the chickens, and basically you can just take the stick, and as long as you get it in their peripheral vision, they'll kind of go the other way. So it's it's used to guide the followers of the masses, right? And let's see, and let's see. Oh, and it was also for defense and balance, the balance of the shepherd when he's walking in the mountains. So it's that balance and that guiding aspect of the good shepherd, right? Which also echoes into Nimrod, echoes into like Jesus, echoes into like, we see this shepherd kind of ideal within Osiris kind of echoing in to a lot of things down the line, and then so the flail, it was like kind of a stick that had like 3 tassels, almost like a cat o' nine tail, almost something along those lines, but it was used to move the sheep and to defend against predators. So, basically these are all items that the shepherd would use to take care of and guide and maneuver the flock,
Interesting.
I've often wondered sometimes if that that cross and that peace symbol, I forgot what the name of it is.
Oh, so when you see in a lot of magical drawings and representations and symbolic art, you'll see them holding either a P-shaped item or a B-shaped item, right? Yeah. And basically, depending on how they're holding it, it represents the energy of movement, either going up or down. And the upward-facing one is called a par, and the downward-facing one is called a bar. And it directly relates to the pharaoh. So, but it's basically the pharaoh and the way in which the energy is flowing and moving. With the representation,
I was covering from hell. I'm going to be doing that for myself as like, my own show and like a solo thing. And I started to question if bars themselves in movies are kind of used as like a spot for like how the characters come into existence and start going out into the story. I know that sounds weird, but it was almost like, is this like where the things are coming from, like the abyss of the mind? But
well, in the bar being the lower, the one pointing downward would insinuate almost like a lower form of chaotic energy with those shadows swimming in the deep, So yeah, I could see that,
Even things I've thought about with that staff and that symbol, I mean, this may be a stretch, but even like as drawing sigils, I mean, depending if you go by like how you're told you're supposed to do it, I mean, I could be wrong. I don't know if it starts off this way, ends this way. It's been a while since I've actually drawn a sigil like this, but you start off with like a circle. I think you start off with a circle, and then you draw it, and then wherever you stop, you put like a line at the end. But you're starting off with a circle. Now it's not I understand the thing is an open hook. But still, you know what I'm saying? Like, it's still something kind of like in that shape that you got to start off with. Yep. I don't know if there's something to that, but it's interesting.
Yeah. Well, I know in Catholicism you have the staff with the X and the P.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So apparently that's called the Chi Rho monogram, and it's the first two letters of Christ in Greek.
Right.
So interesting. And in the new Puss in Boots movie for kids, he marks his own grave with a P that looks just like that P. A couple times. Well, he was marking it with a sword.
Yeah.
Kind of like how Zorro would do, but he would just do it with a P.
Yeah.
But it has that styling to it.
Well, did he do it 3 times? Because then it could look like 6.
He might have. I don't know.
Well, and,
depending on which way they drew it.
And the marking of the grave kind of echoes from Osiris into the mythos of Hiram Abiff within the Masonic,
Well, he marks his own grave in the movie. He buries his clothes. The Puss in Boots buries his clothes, and he marks it with a P, and he says, "Puss in Boots is dead," and then he comes back after.
But it's the Croix with the P?
No, it's just his initial, but it has that styling of like the Greek P.
Okay. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah, you got to wonder about these movies. Well,
man, it's full. That movie, it's full.
Yeah, well, and like we were talking about, me being an artist, and studying these symbols, I lace it's a way to tell a story within a piece of art.
Yes.
So textuality.
Yeah, well, and that comes down to the idea of, like the Bible says, those with eyes to see and those with ears to hear. It's, yeah.
Oh, no,
I think it's just swirling around us, everywhere.
Exactly.
So now let's see. Osiris is also associated with the Bennu bird, which is the Greek phoenix, right? And he is chief. Now Osiris's chief title that they used to mostly call him when he was alive. He was called as Winifred, right? Which means the beautiful one.
Like Winifred?
Yeah, like Winifred, but yeah, Winifred.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So, and he and I now, and then it's also said that even going back to the womb, when they were in, the womb of the cosmos, before they were born into human form, it's said that both Osiris and Isis were already madly in love with one another. So, from the time of their creation, it was like love supreme between them, Yeah.
Jamie and Cersei. Game of Thrones. Right.
So now, in life, when he was alive, he taught agriculture and he gave laws, and he civilized humans. And this is where, within my studies, that I really began to start to relate Osiris with the character of Nimrod. Because Nimrod also, set up the first walled cities, civilized people, brought
Wasn't
in
he associated? I was going to say agriculture. I remember that with Nimrod. Yeah.
agriculture, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then also Nimrod set up weights and measures, set up, stone boundary lines for property. So this talk of Osiris going out and doing these same types of things echoes back also to Cain, setting up the first city of, what was it, Enoch, and echoes into Nimrod setting up the first city of Ur. So it's just interesting how all these stories kind of wash into one another when you begin to look at the details.
Yeah, and Cain was a farmer too.
Cain was yes, he was a husbandman, is what they called him, which was a tiller of the land.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so before the idea of being married to a woman, man was the husbandman of the land, and basically was responsible for feeding, and producing, bringing forth, agriculture. Yeah, and that's, and you get into the whole Cain and Abel story, and that's kind of, I think, the transition almost between hunter-gatherer and the bringing in of agriculture, because with the hunter-gatherer moving into the shepherd almost, where you have this again back to Osiris. What was it? Abel brought forth the first of the herd, right?
Yeah.
And then Cain brought forth the first of the crop.
Yes.
And so the idea of this agriculture is a consistent thing that we see, echoing through all these stories. And again, with Osiris, now eventually, and we're going to discuss this when we get to the mystery part, as far as the actual Osiris being killed and resurrected, right? But eventually, Osiris gets chopped up by his brother Set, who goes by many names, and we'll cover a bunch of those.
Awesome.
And then he is resurrected. So now later, when we see the actual representations when they were having festivals for Osiris, right? These were public festivals that were open to the public. So these weren't necessarily, they were part of the mysteries, but they were the public part of the mysteries. And so the people would basically celebrate Osiris with festivals of processions, where they would have almost like a parade, basically. And then they would also have at the temple of Abydos, they would have these nocturnal rites. Let's see. So, yeah, and Osiris, when he died, he assimilated this other character who was the ancient god of the dead that echoed back even further, who was Kehenti Imintu, and which means the foremost of the Westerners. So basically, Osiris takes on this personification of being the one that is the furthest west of all of the dead. So basically referring to the Western lands, as far as the traveling into the Western lands. And I don't have it in the notes, but I thought we should get into it, and this is probably a good spot. The idea of the path of Osiris is essentially after you're weighed and you're allowed to proceed into the higher, mansions or realms or spheres of the tree, right? Basically, as you move through this path of Osiris, you have to know secret passwords for different gates. You have to know different sigils and symbols to be able to communicate with these different entities that sit at these different gates as you rise through. And Anubis would oftentimes escort the person on this path of Osiris, right? And if you got to a gate where you didn't know the appropriate password or the appropriate sigil or the appropriate sign or symbol, then you would be abandoned in the cosmos on this certain sphere of reality, you know?
Sounds like purgatory.
Well, but this is moving into the higher realms. So
yeah, well, on your way to heaven, purgatory is on your way to heaven.
Well, yeah, okay. I've always thought purgatory is more of a little bit lower form of.
No, it's a place where souls get refined before they can enter heaven, but you're guaranteed heaven eventually.
Right. See, and it's kind of in the Zoroastrian thought.
So maybe this could be hell.
Well,
this is probably lower than purgatory. Yeah.
This is lower than purgatory. Well, see, now in Zoroastrianism, when the soul is refined, right, they looked at it like as cordwood, where essentially you would be put into the flames. So this is why I associate it with a lower form. You'd be put into the flames so that all of the parts of you that were corrupted could fall away, so that you could become lighter and ascend. So, yeah.
That is that idea also. Yeah, it's like you have to suffer more before you can ascend
Before
higher.
you can ascend, yeah.
You know, that even makes sense. I wanted to mention this as soon as you started going into this. From my experience in the OTO through initiations, everything you're saying, too, goes along with that. You know, during the initiations, you know, it's very much like a play, and for the most part, it's always as if, like, there's soldiers of the camp that you're at. There's people guarding the camp. When you go through these things, you will repeat a word, a grip, you know, some other thing. There's like 2 or 3 things that go along with all this stuff, and you have to repeat it to the guards of the camps to make sure that you can stay there or safe passage, blah, blah, blah. So, like, it's the same thing as you're saying. It's like you're going through these things, and every time I've had to do that. You have to repeat all these things to all these people there. It's very much like what you just said. You have to have, like, a certain word, a keyword. You got to have a certain handshake, and then there's, like, certain gestures.
Yeah, you're taught those at the different levels as you progress.
Yes,
and you have to remember them and live them. Because if you have to participate, even if you're this high, if you have to participate in a lower ritual, you still have to have all that knowledge to be able to bring somebody else up. You know, it's, and that definitely ties into how the Masonic orders function as well, which we know all of these orders from the Golden Dawn, the Order Templi Orientis, the Masonic orders, they all rely on the idea of Kabbalah and the Tree of Life, you know. So and back to Kabbalah, and I think we talked about this before, that the Ka is the soul personality, the Ba is the energetic representation of all your memories and thoughts, and kind of like a copy of yourself, like all the things that you've done and have and do. And then the Ankh is the life itself that holds it all together. So you get Kabbalah, which brings us, I think, when the Ibiru left Egypt and went through their 40 years in the desert and became the Israelites, I think that that's kind of how you see the transition of Kabbalah becoming and coming into Kabbalah.
It's almost like thought, sound, and form.
Yeah.
Like even going down that way. Yeah, you know, something like that.
For sure, 100%.
You know, something I even wanted to mention real quick, I'm not going to get too into it because I've already had problems with, you know, repeating stuff of initiations, but, you know, just real quick for some people, like talking about the gestures and all that stuff, even in like the first 2 initiations, I think in the OTO, the gestures all start off with you sticking out your hand like this with just your thumb out. Yeah. You know, and the reason I'm even thinking about that, we're talking about gestures, and a couple of days ago, I did get back to Ramsey, but then he asked me a few other questions. He randomly sent me a picture of like an occultist or somebody who's a known occultist doing something with their thumb, and he's like, does this mean anything to you? And I was like, I've never thought about the fact that like the first 2 gestures that you learn in the OTO all has to do with making that symbol, sticking your thumb out, and then someone grabs it and squeezes it a certain amount of times. I'm not gonna get, but it all is actually just sticking out your hand like a thumb. I'm like, people could be doing that like this, and actually, who knows what the fuck that means?
I think this goes into the mafia. As far as mafioso, going almost into like Slavian Russian, but it's
isn't there even like going like that?
Yeah,
Wasn't that
like
even?
that.
I remember that as a kid in school.
This is the dagger. Yeah, this is the dagger to basically silence. Going up through. Yeah. So yeah. So now with Osiris, right? As far as within Egyptian culture, there was a king called Busiris, who is said to be the son of Poseidon, right? And this is about 2400 BC, right about the same time we see the representations of Osiris coming about. But Osiris, back to the double, he plays that double role of fertility in life and the judge of the dead in the afterworld, right? And let's see. So, and then also within the kingship itself, any of the pharaohs of Egypt, when they died, they took on the personification of Osiris. And then whoever their son was, or the next pharaoh, basically took on the role of the resurrected Horus. So, here we can see this idea very much like how the elder Nimrod, fled or died, and then the younger Ninus or Tammuz basically becomes Nimrod the Great. So the risen again. So we have this consistent pattern, and I think that, I think we talked about it before, but I think Osiris is the fundamental template where all of this resurrected God philosophy kind of comes from, So now at Memphis, Osiris was associated with the Apis bull, if you're familiar with that. And they called it the Osiris Apis in Egypt, right? And in Greece, they called it, translated into Serapis. So, and then the higher mysteries of Osiris were based around this 7-letter god named Serapis.
Real quick, I do want to add in Katy Perry's Dark Horse video does take place in Memphis, Egypt.
In Memphis.
Yeah. And it's all Egyptian stuff,
Right. And you got to wonder, because this is more associated with a bull, But the Dark Horse, that comes into more of the biblical aspects of the 4 riders of the apocalypse, But it's funny that it's at Memphis, because this is basically the place where Osiris was worshipped after he had passed away and become the god of the dead and basically occupied the underworld, right? There was the idea that this Apis bull, and it was said, depending on the philosopher you read, it was said to have like up to 26 different qualities that they had to check for on the bull to determine whether or not this was Osiris being reborn into his new physical form on Earth, right? So basically, at this temple in Memphis, they basically had this worship going on uninterrupted for somewhere around about 1,500 to 1,600 years, where they would have this Serapis, or this Apis bull. And the Apis bull, it was said to be a bull. So there would be a cow that would get struck by lightning, right? And supposedly the calf inside would be this bull that was the Apis bull. and they had to check all of the. So now you're getting into the alchemists and the idea of calling down lightning from the heavens for rituals, and if they can, direct, this cow to be struck by lightning. And this also ties into Dionysus, who, basically his mother was struck by lightning, and he was born, basically from her remains, So it's this idea of this this enlightenment, this energetic form. Zoroaster was struck down by multiple cases of lightning, right? But nonetheless, this bull would be a black bull that would have a white square on its forehead. And basically they would give this bull all the extravagances. They would feed it the best food. They would, just give it the best grazing lands. And it was said that anybody that the bull, they would make homage to the bull, right? And bring their children to see the bull. And if the bull would snort on your child, then it was prophesized that you would have somebody that was going to be important in society. Oh, wow. So and then at a certain point, at an allotted time, based on the turning of the heavens, they would basically take this bull and then sacrifice it, and then wait for the next Apis bull to come about. But now, if you follow that Apis bull into Egypt, or not into Greece, in Greece they said that Apis represented Pluto. So they were actually, basically worshiping, the Lord of the underworld as the Apis bull. So if you can kind of tie that back around, and in accordance, if Pluto is the Lord of the underworld, right, and Osiris is the Lord of the underworld, we kind of have some cross comparison here. You know what I'm saying?
I think Zeus also turns into a bull a couple times.
Yes, he does. He does.
Now, that story with Zeus, when he turns into a bull, is that associated with the underworld as well?
I think it's to avoid Hera, his wife, getting mad at him.
And he's usually
like, I'll go back to hell before I deal with that.
Yeah. He's usually turning into something to mate with someone.
Yeah. Well, and he also turned, I think that's Apollo's mother, into a cow. Io.
Yeah.
I think it's am I getting my stories mixed up?
Yeah, I got to get more into Greek stuff. I mean, I've read a bit of it here, but I'm not as well washed in it as I am in a lot of this other stuff, Yeah, so let's see. Now Plutarch, the philosopher, he says that Osiris was basically the symbol of the orb in the heavens as far as the sun itself. But there was sects of different Egyptians that also saw Osiris as a river god, basically called Nilus, right? And that's another carryover where I cross into Nilus being related to Ninus, which is young Nin or young Nimrod. So, there's various places where the Osiris story crosses over into Nimrod as well.
What were you saying that name was? Ninus? N-I-N?
Well, Ninus is young Nimrod, right? Which is where they also called him Nin or N-I-N, which is, I think, where Trent Reznor gets the whole...
That's where I was going with that, actually.
Yeah, 100%.
I've even seen, I forgot, I had seen it, and I remember, kind of double-checking it, and I forgot exactly what it was, but I've seen somebody do some sort of taking Nin and putting it into neither gematria or Hebrew, and showing, what it equals to, and I was like, oh, man. I forgot. It might even, I hate to say it, somehow might add up to 17. Something weird, it was... I do think there's something up with that name.
Yeah.
I hate to say
it.
I mean, like I've said before, and, again, I'm not knocking David Lynch, and yes, I guess I am biased to him because I do like his stuff, so I guess it might be hard for me to say he's a fucked up dude, but who knows? Who knows? But he did have, in season 3 of Twin Peaks, almost every episode ended with a live band playing. But he had Trent Reznor on there, 9 Inch Nails. I'm sure it's because they both, You know, again, like you were saying, we put stuff out in art. I put stuff out in my logos, and people who are of understanding see that, and they can they can vibe together and understand what each other is saying. So you end up working with people sometimes, I think, because of that.
Oh, yeah. And the fact that David Lynch is putting Trent Reznor on the Twin Peaks soundtrack, you know.
That's what I'm saying. You're not going to... Exactly.
Yeah. And I tell you what, man, I've got all the Twin Peaks soundtracks on vinyl here.
Oh.
Yeah, I listen to them while I'm drawing, man. It's like good, ambient, spacey kind of, you know, flow music, you know.
Flow state vibes.
Yeah. Exactly.
You know what I noticed last night? Sorry to interrupt you, and then we'll go on. I think I was just going through like on my TV on YouTube. Sometimes it'll show like more suggestions, I guess, than you do from your phone. And it was suggesting, I guess, Angelo Badalamenti, probably because of like Twin Peaks. And I saw that I had no idea that he did the soundtrack for A Nightmare on Elm Street. One of them. It's not the first one, but he actually did a soundtrack for one of them. I was like, I had no idea.
Interesting.
Yeah, I thought he really only did Peaks stuff. I was like, oh, shit.
Yeah, wild.
That is weird. Another weird, sorry, to go back to the IO thing. I just was looking up IO really quick while you were talking. And there's a story where IO is referred to as ISIS. Weird. Yeah.
Well, and you know, I think I've seen a lot of crossovers between different sexes as far as male coming female.
Yeah. So this story, just real quick, it's Io was born and then is mentioned as Isis, but she's supposed to be told that she's a boy to evade her father's wrath because the father wanted a boy, not a girl.
Right.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No, not at all. But, and again, you know, there's links to the Greek Dionysus and Osiris. And we got into the Plutarch thing. But that's the thing with the river god Nilus, right? When you look into it's Nilus and Ninus, right? So regionally, all these kind of areas are touching. So you know this river god was also associated with Ninus, and basically what they would do is they would take a skiff, like a wooden skiff, and they would take an effigy of this god Nilus or Ninus and put it on the skiff and basically send it out into the river. And they would pray that the water gods would basically pull it down under the water so that Nilus or Ninus would bring the rains so that they could, you know, basically water the crops. So, and that very much echoes into Osiris being put into the casket and being floated down the river, you know. So yeah, it's just an interesting time.
Yeah, for sure.
Now, I have a big old Freemasonic encyclopedia that I picked up, and there's just too many interesting tidbits in it, but I always look stuff up in it, and it's 1886 Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, written by Albert G. Mackey. You know, you're aware of him?
No.
Albert G. Mackey, man.
And what was this written? I'm sorry. Say that again one more time.
Albert G. Mackey.
No, but when was it written? You said it.
1886.
Okay. All right.
It was when it was published.
Yeah, I'm just wondering if this is, again, I hate to say it, going back to the movie From Hell, when the guy was trying to figure out the Freemasons, which now Jack the Ripper happened in 1888. So now this book is prior to that. There is a part where Johnny Depp is going through some like kind of book on Freemasons, and he starts realizing that the Jews that was written on the wall may actually be Jubellum, and the other one it may not be, you know, because of the way it was spelled. So I'm wondering if this is maybe I have to go check this out. Now this might be the same book that he was reading in the movie.
Yeah. And you know about the characters Jubellum. They're basically the first like merchant class.
It was the three that killed Hiram Abiff too, I think. Yeah,
and goes into Hiram Abiff. Yeah. Well, that's much later. That's the whole Masonic thing, man. You know, there's actually no historical character that is Hiram Abiff. He's strictly created as as a mythical element to personify. I think it's almost the passing of the secret word of the pharaoh that basically is passed when one pharaoh dies and a new pharaoh rises, and that was the seeking of these three different, which they call in Masonic lore, they call the Jooes. Jooes, I think is how it's spelled. But nonetheless, those three different entities that come and hit him in different ways before they kill him, they're basically trying to get, and I think this is when the Shepherd Kings came into Egypt and were this is a story about them trying to get the Pharaoh's secret word so that they could basically take over the pharaohship, you know? And they didn't get it. So they had to create this new story, or basically this new word, the secret word, which is essentially Mahabon of the Masons, you know. So back to the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, right? It reads, historically, Osiris, he is said to be a great and powerful king who, leaving Egypt, traversed the world, leading a host of fauns and satyrs and other fabulous beings in his train. Actually, an army of followers. He civilized the whole earth and taught mankind to fertilize the soil and perform works of agriculture. The idea, which was subsequently expressed by the Greeks in their travels of Dionysus and wanderings of Circe. And it is not improbable that the old Masons had some dim precept of this story, which they have incorporated under the figure of Euclid in their Legend of the Craft. So that's what they say about Osiris as far as the Freemasons. But I think it's interesting that he led like a parade, you know, around civilizing with a host of fauns and satyrs, you know.
It's interesting.
Yeah.
Another motif very heavy in Greek mythology,
Greek mythology.
The satyrs. And, yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
But yeah, it's
how was
just
the satyrs spelled?
Satyrs.
Oh, okay. I was thinking of the Satyr Square, wondering if there was
Yeah. Well, and I think all that goes back into the Satyr or Saturn or Saturday, or it's all those words kind of interlink, you know.
Oh, I never thought of like Satyr meaning Saturn. That's interesting.
Mm.
It's not too far.
Well, and I think what it is the satyrs in some stories were actually the children of Saturn. So yeah. So yeah, that's Osiris, and you know he's probably one of the more important symbolic elements within the Egyptian mythos. You know, just like Isis is as well. You know.
Mm-hmm. I do think, and like you said, I know I've even heard other people bitch, but even like at the OTO, they had said that they thought it was very much more of like a phallic energy, or male-based, or very like sun, going towards that way.
Mm-hmm.
And just going by like the stuff that you covered, like I'm saying, like before, I even noticed throughout the initiations, there's things of like, you know, reenacting, I guess, Osiris and stuff with him.
Yeah.
So that is very interesting.
Yeah, I think it carries through any of the organizations that rely upon Kabbalah and the Tree of Life. You know,
I mean, he does even fall on the sphere of, you know, technically. I mean, you could probably find him like more than once, but I think technically, like on the sixth sphere, where is like the balance, the beauty, kind of where I think, well, that's where you come into contact with your holy guardian angel. They say. Which I have often thought you mentioned before you questioned about Hiram Abiff being a real person. I have often wondered if is the HA just the holy angel, and then you just toss in the G from Freemasonry and you got your HGA again, the Holy Guardian Angel. But you know, is that like where you start to actually kind of untether yourself and go to other places.
Right.
So I would think if that's a possibility, you would see that type of story going throughout maybe a magical career.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it is the essential story also of what is it, Joseph Campbell and the hero's journey, essentially.
Heart of Darkness?
What's that?
In like Heart of Darkness, you mean?
No, as far as the Osiris Smith.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, the hero's journey is very much like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or even
since getting taken apart at your source, going into the underworld, being resurrected anew. It's it's kind of a persistent story.
I even think in some ways, I just think it's done differently, and I guess the scenario is a little bit differently to the eyes, the way you picture it. But I even think the Gita in itself is showing that too. Because I also think a lot of that is within the mind. I don't think all those people are actually on the battlefield. So I think like you kind of see like the hero's journey like within inside the mind and Yeah.
Oh yeah. Yeah. 100%. So now let's see. Let's get into Set here, right? So Set, the worship of Set, was centered in Nubt, Nubt, on the west bank of the Nile, and it's basically associated with a vast cemetery complex at Nakada. And Set was the patron of the 11th nome of Upper Egypt. So he was basically the head chief god of the 11th nome. And have we talked about the nomes at all?
No. I was just going to ask you about that too.
Yeah. So basically, what they did in Egypt as far as government, right, is they broke up the city into 12 different nomes, which essentially each nome had a trinity that ruled over it, right? And so basically it's almost like the zodiac wheel.
That's what I was thinking.
Holy shit. And within each one of those gnomes there was basically a trinity that ruled over that particular gnome.
Gnome starts with a G, right?
It's Nome.
Oh, okay.
I was going to ask how you spell it.
Yeah.
But that's just a modern personification. I'm not even sure what the Egyptians called it. As far as I guess the best way to look at it would be as if you check the Coptic, what the word is in Coptic, because that's the even in modern times, Coptic, the Coptic language is ancient Egyptian that has survived into modern form. So we still do know at a base kind of what Egyptian language sounded like, but nonetheless, he was the patron over this 11th nome, right? Him and Nephtys, whereas Isis and Osiris were over another nome, right? Let me get a drink.
Not a problem. You're talking a lot, so I understand.
Right.
I always have to have a drink with me.
Yeah, so Set, he was viewed almost as a monster or a devil by many Egyptians, right? And he had, in a lot of the imagery and the descriptions, he has a queer snout or nose with pointed ears like a hyena. It's said that he crept in the desert, living in the sandstorms, propagating evil. And he is related to the howling of the desert winds. And he is essentially seen as a lost soul in the clutches of the character of Typhoon, right?
Ceremonial magic, Apophis and Typhon, in my opinion, are also kind of representative of like the beast too.
Yeah, he's definitely like a Satan kind of character.
An adversary.
Yeah, the adversary for sure.
Which is used in the LVX formula. I just want to mention that real quick.
Yeah. And he's the protector of the dead in Egypt. So when you die, he's basically the protector of the dead against grave robbers. So that because it was very important to them to essentially have their body in a whole form, because they believed they were going to physically resurrect. Right.
Yes.
So now his symbols were the hippo, and let's see, he was, as Typhoon, his symbol was the hippo. He was sacred to Mars, and Mars is enthroned in the house of Scorpio, and Scorpio was in the house of Typhoon. So there's this whole interrelationship between Scorpio and Typhoon and the energies of Mars and Typhon, and they relate all that to the water horse or the hippo. So it's kind of a...
So funny. My son was watching a movie called The Water Horse last night. I have to pay attention to it.
Yeah. So, the water horse was basically a representation of Set in Egypt, as he could go above and below, transversing the worlds. He had all this power for destruction. Like he would, rip boats and just tear them under the water if they weren't, so like it's and just the sheer power was why they called him the water horse.
Well, I wonder if it relates to the hippocampus, right? In the brain.
In the brain, possibly,
Mm-hmm.
Even not to sound silly, but like even with the Scorpio sign, I mean, depending on how you draw it, I mean, it could even start to look like an elephant, I mean, you could see two points, twin peaks. I think Scorpio has to do with death as well, so that's how I look at that. But I mean, it could look like something literally with two humps and then like a snout going down into water or something.
Yeah. I mean, let's see. So the ass is also sacred to this demonic force, right?
Oh, it's very sacred nowadays.
Yeah. So now you see the symbology of Jesus riding the ass, right? It's funny, man. The elephant and the ass, dude. They just won't leave us alone.
Yeah.
But now Jesus riding the ass into Jerusalem, right, is the same as when we see images of Hermes standing atop of Typhoon, right, which is the same as St. George standing atop the dragon. So we have this symbol kind of echoing, forward. Let's see. And when man transitioned from a mist to solid, it was Typhoon who became the breath of the new mortal man. So once the Poffer came down and gave us the breath, right, the Egyptians considered that the breath itself, as far as that wind moving in and out, that physical force is Typhoon as well. That's why language can be so destructive as well.
This goes back, I think, to something I might have been saying. I can't remember when I said this. I think, Teresa, you might have been there when I was getting at this. I do think, to an extent, air, sound, you're going back to like trumpets and even stuff like that in Revelations and Tarot. I think that is showing male expansive energy because it is something that's like flying out. It's going out into existence. I think breath can be shown like that too, and I do think the beast is just more of male expansive energy without restriction, and the scarlet whore is more of the left side, which is more of like putting into form and all of this. So I could still see how the breath is associated with the beast, because that is still a way of breaking out of the form that you're in and going out and spreading out into existence. As silly as that sounds, it's coming out of the shell that you're in and going, just like now. When this goes out, the shit from my mouth is going out across the internet. That's expansive. I'm sorry to say it, but
it's interesting when you start thinking about podcasts as far as how when we put and I thought about this as art in the past, as far as I put the image out there and it kind of does its own thing. But man, when we're taking representations of ourselves and us speaking and putting it out into the ethos, we're turning ourselves into etheric beings that anyone can just summon up at any time and
so
participate
weird
in the energy that we're just dripping into the cosmos, man.
I've said that before. I was like, who would have thought like 100 years ago, maybe 200 years ago, somebody would have told you in the future you will have things that you can put in your head to listen to voices.
Yeah.
Like if you're somebody who uses headphones and listens to podcasts, you're literally hitting a button to listen to voices in your head.
Yes.
It's a little weird if you think about it. Actually.
And also with the black scrying devices, we're like bringing imagery from, around the cosmos.
It is magic at our fingertips.
Yeah.
It's all magic. That's why I say, like, in some ways, all I did was just switch magical weapons. Really, I went from creating circles to now like sitting behind a microphone and all this electronic equipment, and I'm sending myself out for anybody to pick up and listen to and believe in, create in their mind who I am. It's very magical.
And have you seen how some of these motherboards and these different computer boards actually look like pyramid complexes?
Some of them, like I was saying before, when you make the circle and then draw the lines, it doesn't look much different than the soldering on motherboards sometimes.
Just like circuitry,
Yes.
And you know that with artificial intelligence, right, they have what they do is they set up what they call a logic tree, and it's actually like a tree of life that has all these points on it with all these interrelationships. And then basically it'll go to this point, and then based on that, it'll shoot up a new tree of life.
1,000 points of light, baby.
And then it'll basically it'll series through these trees to basically determine a point of logic so that it can process.
Yeah, and I think the things that run the programs for AI are called daemons or demons.
Daemons. Yes. Well, now there's also within artificial intelligence and systems networking, there's this thing called the Nautineer, which is it's the Gaul. It was the Sumerian word Gaul that basically translated eventually into the word Nautineer. But it's the idea of this overlord watcher that basically monitors the system so the system doesn't spiral out of control. What? So there's all these ancient philosophies that they put into creating these scrying mirrors so that we can, do all these things that we're doing.
Nothing new under the sun.
That's what I said yesterday, right? Did I say that yesterday?
So true.
You got to wonder, like within Egypt and like all these ancient pyramids, they're putting like mica between the layers. They're using like these conductive stones. They're using were they at one point creating giant sort of motherboards, and I've even heard of pools in front of some of the pyramids where they had pools of mercury so they could stand on top of the pyramids and like stargaze without having to look up at the heavens. They would just like look. So with, all these different elements of technology, and then we get back to Elon Musk saying, with the AI, we're summoning the demon into, and have you heard about this new thing, the AI hallucinations?
No, what's that?
Yeah. So if they ask the AI a question and it doesn't know the answer, it just, from the forces of chaos, it just makes some shit up whole cloth and basically confidently gives you a full answer as to what it is that's completely wrong and made up.
What?
Wow.
Yes.
So it lies.
So are we seeing the demons of chaos kind of starting to precipitate into the mechanisms of what this vessel is creating?
That's crazy.
In the energetic forms, and back to electricity and this bringing entities through the electrical machinations. It's interesting.
I was even saying that to Teresa not too long ago as well, when it came to like talking about metals and how some of them are very good for conducting electricity. Gold is one of them, and I was like, maybe that's why all these Catholic churches have all this expensive gold stuff in there.
Yeah.
Like, did you ever think that some of these, like you were saying, stones, because even, believe it or not, Catholic, there's supposed to be some type of stone that technically even sits on the altar that the Catholic priests use.
Yeah.
I forgot what it's made out of. But like you get into all these stones and like all this expensive gold stuff. Like, you know, these structures could start being good conductors for electricity if you know the math and the science.
And how energy flows and what type of energy are they working with?
I'm telling you, it's much more mystical than people think.
Oh yeah. Well, and that gets into you go back into you know, from the time of the shekel, that where they would bring the wheat for the coin to have the sacred prostitute. The temples had just a knack for accumulating wealth, you know, and bringing in gold and stones. And like, that's essentially how the Hebrews ended up building the breastplate with all the different, you know, sacred stones on it. You know, it's all these, well, and even getting into, you know, the chakras and alchemy. Each one of those chakras is associated with a metal, you know, and you have the earthly 7 metals, and then you have the heavenly 3, you know, metals. And it's it's interesting stuff, man, when you start getting into ascending and descending in these mechanisms, you know.
Well, yeah, I've even said on the tree, I think even following the metals going up or down, you can start to see the difference. I mean, you even go from like how hard they are to like almost like look at Mercury. You know what I'm saying? You start going up, now you get into Mercury. That's not, you know, it could be liquid. Technically, now if you go to gold, I mean, that still could be, depending on what carat, it still could be kind of liquid in a sense, not fully solid.
Yeah. You know? So I've got a friend who he basically buys scrap metal, like silver and gold and all, you know, different, like, you know, just whatever he can get for cheap, right? And he melts it down. And he's, you know, I was talking to him around the bonfire the other night, and he actually like has this whole alchemical process that he goes through, and he's like, you know, adding different like nitric acid and different things into it to make the metals do different things. And he's talking about how, you know, the silver will just float to the top, and he was talking about how he could just take gold and in a solid form and put something on it and just turn it to liquid, and then put something else on it and turn it back solid again. Like, and I was like, dude, I want, you know, I told him I want to come see this.
Yeah, right?
That's crazy.
But it's like, he was saying that a lot of this stuff, you can't find it in any of the books. That basically he had to, like, through online communities and other people that are in the process of doing these things, basically learn these processes, because the refiners of metal generally, they want to keep that, you know, the ancient smithy or the blacksmith, you know, it's one of the oldest, like, what do you call it, guilds, where they essentially kept their secrets. It's
like an alchemy guild.
Yeah, like a secret society based around, you know, and that goes back to Cain and these workers in metals, and, you know, which have a tie-in with Nimrod and Osiris. So yeah,
back to them.
right. So now Seth, biblically is Seth, right? And even if you go to the Egyptian Antiquities website, right, and you read about Osiris and Set, they call Seth on the Egyptian Antiquities site. So here we're directly relating that back to the offspring of Noah and the biblical stories, right? So, and there's a whole line of thinking that it was through Noah and Cush and that line, that basically that was the line of Osiris, and that the line of Seth basically was the Asiatic line, and they basically kind of were going up against each other, and these shepherd kings were the line of Seth coming in and basically stopping the Osirian mysteries. So you have, with this, not only do you have the Egyptian tie-ins, but you start to be able to tie this in with the Bible. You start to tie this in with other cultures, as we talked about how Isis and Osiris kind of moved, So it's just, and then up through Kabbalah with all the Tree of Life stuff as well. So, we see this thought form kind of flowing out into these many, schools of thought and directions, which is why I think it's honestly become such a powerful force and a powerful symbol, even in the modern vernacular, as far as modern times,
Yeah, and even today, it's still like a battle of bloodlines, basically.
Yeah.
It's always been.
Yeah. And it's just funny that, we're just if biblically we're just talking about the sons of Noah, and it's interesting how, the sons of Japhet ended up in Europe, and just the distribution of, all these lines in the different countries. And then we see also at the fall of the Tower of Babel, and they teach these different bloodlines, basically these new 70 languages. And so consistently over and over, we're seeing these same bloodlines relating to, the lines of Noah, these Scythian lines, kind of looking at the dragon, bloodline coming about in the worship of Sobek in Egypt. It's just interesting how these are all parts within what I think are the modern blue bloods, because the winners tell the history. So, and like we were saying, we didn't see the rise of this philosophy until the New Kingdom of Egypt, so, but the story of the gods was there. But as far as this practice and this belief in the murder of Osiris and the resurrection of Horus, So let's see, back to Set. Let's see, he was the brother and husband of his wife, Nephtys. But then he also had a consort, right? That was called Ta'aret, who was a hippo-headed deity who ruled over fertility and childbirth, right? So Set or Seth or Setos or Typhoon, he was considered as the instigator of confusion, the destroyer, the one who brought disorder. He's associated with the color red, like Mars. His animals, the Set animal. They have this thing they call the Set animal or the Set monster, right? And it's generally looked at as a red-headed beast with a forked tongue, cloven hoof, and it's called Shah. And it's a red dog-like beast, right? And let's see, so his symbols are the griffin, the hippo, water horse, which we talked about, the crocodile, right? And when we look at the crocodile, and that gets into this Mishu anointing of the fat of the dragon, the fat of the crocodile, right? And this idea of the god Sobek, this crocodile dragon god, right? That they would actually be jewel. They would like encrust these crocodiles with jewels, right?
Bedazzling back then.
Yeah, exactly. And they would keep them at the bottom of a well, kind of symbolic of down in the bottomless pit or in the cave, and then when they would die, these ritual crocodiles, they would mummify them and basically have a procession to basically worship the death of the god, but the crocodile, right, it lays eggs in the sand, and Thoth, he's represented as the ibis, right? Which when it has its head, and we're going to get into this later, I'll just mention it now. When he has his head under his wing, they said it looked like a human heart, like a pure white human heart of purity, right? But nonetheless, the ibis, when it goes out onto the beach and it's like sticking its little nib down into the sand, it would kill the crocodile eggs. So because it would look for the crocodile eggs to drain them and drink them. So Thoth, being represented by the ibis, symbolically is the enemy of Set, who's represented by the crocodile, because the ibis kills the crocodile eggs before they're even born. So you have this, and this is why, and we see Thoth kind of like in the back curtains of the whole passion play of the Osirian mystery.
I mean, he says he was there to watch the universe be created.
Be created from its beginning.
Yeah,
so we'll get into Thoth after we finish up Set, man. Dude, Thoth is a deep subject. You know what I'm saying?
I even think Thoth, like I said was before with Osiris, but like Thoth, like he definitely, in my opinion, is on the tree in multiple areas. You know, so like that's a kind of like an important character in a sense, if it is
in the whole. Well, and that's Thoth, Hermes. That's
Raphael, is Raphael.
Yeah, it you know, when you start tracing that down, and then even into other cultures, Thoth becomes so many different characters. It's a little hard to disseminate a lot of times, you know. Let's see. So finish that. Let's see. So they would invoke Set in love spells and love charms. And let's see. At one point when Set was alive, before he became the personification of evil, right? He actually saved Ra, who was the sun god, from the cosmic serpent Apophis. So, you know, at one point he was still, you know, before, and I think what it was Thoth, Set always kind of had a thing for Isis. But Isis and Osiris, you know, they were like that cosmic love couple that came into being. So I think a lot of this has to do with the idea of Set being jealous of Osiris and his kingship and being with Isis, and, you know, which, I mean, within the energetic form of what Set is, you know, jealousy is one of the factors that drives rage. So that would only be natural, you know, within that symbol, right? So there's an Egyptologist, Wilkerson, and he states, it was said that each night Apophis hypnotized Ra and the entourage who sail with him, except for the god Set, who resisted the serpent's deadly stare and repulsed him with the thrust of his great spear, assuring that the sun would rise every morning, right? So at one point, you know, Set is actually the savior of the sun and reality, right? And we'll get later into when Osiris dies, basically the sun, Ra, goes into the underworld and conspires with Osiris for the resurrection and to bring, you know, but there's a whole period during the time of Set where it's said that, you know, the sun and in the Bible we have like the 3 days of darkness, and, you know, there's these different times where we have this idea that the sun disappears, you know, and that could be from a pole shift where essentially we're in a state of stasis while the earth is rolling over. A lot of different, but nonetheless.
Don't some people even go back and say that, I think, during the winter equinox, or the winter solstice,
the 3 days of the sun,
yeah, being at like the same
in the sky, yeah, and that has to do with you know, the whole idea of the 3 days in the tomb as well for Jesus, you know, before he's resurrected. So let's see. Now the New Kingdom in 1500 BC. This is where we get the first murder of Osiris. Which a lot of people tie as well back to the Cain and Abel story, you know, as far as the brother murdering the brother, you know. And let's see, and there's also within Greek mythology a point where Typhoon challenges Zeus and Zeus sends Typhoon to Tartarus, much like Apollyon or Lucifer being fallen, So we have these consistent, stories that I think, maybe this Osiris and Set kind of is the template, essentially, at least for the modern personification. I think if you go back into some of the ancient Sumerian stuff, and some of the ancient Vedic stuff, but yeah, let's see. So, okay, now in here we have the Encyclopedia of Freemasonry, right? Nice. And it says that Set or Seth, again, it refers to Set as Seth immediately. It says, it is with a theory of some Masonic writers that the principles of pure primitive Freemasonry were preserved in the race of Seth, which had always kept separate from the rail of Cain. But after the flood, they became corrupted by a secession of a portion of the Sethites who established a spurious Freemasonry of the Gentiles. So that's what the Masons say. Basically, that the Masonic, line, the primitive Masonry, basically comes from the line of Seth or Set, and that at a certain point, that the Freemasonry that we have now, and I think when you go back to Zoroastrianism, we see that they actually, at the age of 14, much like how the Hebrews will have the bar mitzvah, right? That's basically when you became a man, and they would present in Zoroastrianism, they would present them with the Masonic apron. This is the furthest back I've been able to trace the Masonic apron, but that was basically like your reputation. And so following that up, I think that what happened was this ancient form of Masonry at a certain point became corrupted and became kind of like a mystery for the masses, Yeah. So it's just interesting that even the Freemasons say that what they're doing is a corrupted form, of what it once was, right? So let's get into Nephtys.
Oh yeah.
So now Nephtys in Egypt, she was called Nehebt. It's hard to say. And it's spelled in Egyptian is NBTHWT, right? Oh. So it's just basically 6 letters that we've inflected some vowels in to be able to enunciate it. And in she's one of the great Ennead, being the 9 who are worshipped at Heliopolis. And she is paired with Isis in funerary rites. And we'll get into that because during the time when they're mummifying Osiris, basically Nephtys is there to help with the process of resurrecting Osiris, right?
And did you say there was 9 people that were kind of...
Yeah, in the Ennead. And I think these are like the 9 immortals that are worshipped at Heliopolis.
I had William Ramsey on, and we were talking about JFK, and somehow I know like Lee Harvey Oswald was like connected with somebody, I think, from Russia that was into this Council of 9. Where it was like these people that thought that they were channeling these, like, I think 9 spirits. Yeah. And Ramsey had mentioned that, like, that is kind of like a common number to come up with that I didn't even think of, too. There is other examples. I can't remember them now. He did mention them that do all have to do with people channeling 9 beings.
Right.
So now I'm wondering, like, is this going back to that?
Yeah. Now, also you have, what was it? Who was it that went up to the Rothschild ball? You remember, with all the pictures that Salvador Dali basically designed all the costumes, and they had I want to say it was Israeli Regardi, or maybe it was the Spoonbender. What's his name?
I don't
I know
know.
what you're talking about, the spoon bender.
Yeah.
Not Plutarch or whatever. No.
Yeah, but nonetheless, at this Rothschild ball that Salvador Dali designed all the outfits for, they came back and said that they were basically channeling the Aten, which are the 9 divine beings of one of the Egyptian orders. So again, that's another case of them channeling these 9 beings. Yeah. Well, in Heliopolis again, it's all the stuff that goes on with Heliopolis, man. It's pretty interesting.
That is, Heliopolis, I think, is even might be mentioned in the OTO at some point during your magical career of where you're heading to.
Right.
During one of the plays you might be in.
Right. Well, and we talked about Heliopolis being tied in with the Emerald Tablet as well. There, when we were going through that story, So let's see. Now, Nephtys is associated with mourning, as in mourning for the dead. She's associated with the night and darkness, she's more associated with the sun going down, as far as the end of the day, right? And that transition between day and night. Let's see. In temple service, she basically has to do with childbirth, as well as the taking care of the dead. She's used in protection in regard to Heka and magic. And she is a deity of health and the embalming practice, as far as because Osiris being the first mummy, she was basically involved in the first embalming process, And in the temple, she's called the Lady of the House, and she symbolizes the death experience itself, as Isis represents the birth experience, right? So here we have the going in and the coming out, essentially, right? And she is a helpful goddess. She's called the Excellent Goddess, and she is the mother of Anubis, or Inpu. Let's see. And so it was Osiris and Nephtys that got together outside of the marriage of Set and Nephtys, and they birthed Anubis, essentially. So that's where Anubis comes from, is the birth of Osiris and Nephtys. And in Nubia, she is the wife of Anubis, as far as within that culture, right? And she's I've got here nursemaid of Horus. So
that's interesting. Like when you said about Isis and Nephtys, I wonder, like, maybe Isis like kind of births you into this form, and maybe the other one is getting out of it. I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah. Let's see. So she guards every pharaoh against enemies with a fiery breath, right? And she was considered to be the type of entity is called a kite, right? And a Kite, and it's basically, she's a woman with falcon wings, right? So she basically is almost representative of a sort of angelic type creature that we would associate with, essentially, Now she is also represented as the idea of putrefaction, being that transition between life and death, right? And she is the companion of Ra. As the sun is sinking down in the night sky, she basically goes and guides Ra as he enters into the underworld, right? And let's see. At one point, because of the stuff, and Nephtys was always running off to go see Osiris and Isis, and this just drove Set's resentment and his jealousy. And at one point, he confronted Nephtys, right? And she tried to fly off, and he captured her and cut her wings off, right?
Oh, that's they do that. I mean, I wouldn't consider gods of Egypt being too
I remember
correct.
Scene,
but
yes.
He did take off Isis's wings, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, but it wasn't Nephtys.
No, I don't think it was Isis.
Who was that chick? He
I think
removed some
it
chick's
was
wings.
Nephtys.
Oh, I thought that was Isis in the movie.
No.
Which movie?
Gods of Egypt. Yeah, maybe
Which one?
It was Nephtys. Gods of Egypt.
Oh, Gods of Egypt.
Yeah, I know. Seth does remove wings off of some female god. He does do that movie.
It's not. I don't think it's Isis. I'm pretty sure.
Maybe it isn't. Maybe it's Nephtys.
Yeah, because it's his wife, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was her.
Yep.
Oh, I thought he took somebody else's wife's wings off.
Nah, he hated his wife.
Okay.
So, and then after, let's see, and then she was resurrected at one point by Ra, after Set was sent to the underworld. And then once Set is in the underworld, in his final form, he's ruled over by Anubis. So basically, Nephthys' son Anubis ends up taking control over Set when he ends up in the underworld. Again, like we were talking about, Pluto and the Apis bull, all this stuff. You just see all these different this level of rulership and kingship on different levels of form as you ascend through from the crystalline to the etheric. It's but yeah, so that's what I've got on Nephtys. And then next we're gonna go into Thoth.
Yeah, that'll be the next one, right?
Yeah. We're at an hour and a half. You want to go into this a little bit, or do you want to stop here and we could probably wrap both those up in the next one?
Yeah, I was thinking, maybe we'll save all that for the part 3. That's why I was thinking there'll be three parts.
Yeah. So, okay.
Yeah, if you're fine with that. I mean, if there's anything else that you wanted to add to what we covered now, I don't want to cut you short either. So
no, not at all. Not at all. I'm just, trying to, and that's, when you're going through all this stuff, when you're going through all these sources and you're trying to piece together who these characters are, you're literally, taking this fact from here and this fact from here and trying to, put these puzzle pieces together as an understanding of who these characters are, so some of this stuff is more anciently based. Some of this stuff, we're looking at Greek philosophers. Some of this stuff we're looking at Egyptian translations, coming out of Coptic texts. So it's just more than anything, I think what we're really looking at is an amalgamation of what these things have been, what they're becoming, and just like how things ascend through different forms of matter, things also ascend through time, so it's just some interesting stuff to look at, and I'm just constantly intrigued by it all,
Well, like I've said before, I think a lot of different stories from different pantheons are all like just different artistic ways of like showing, in my opinion, like I was saying, like I've said before, I think a lot of these gods that are male and a lot of these gods that are female, it's all the same actual thing.
Yeah.
Just a different timeline in that arc of energy or whatever's going on. So I think when you start picking from all these different areas, I think you can start to see that a little bit better if you sometimes don't look so much at the details, the finite details of like what they looked like, the outfit, but maybe more of their actions and things that's going on. You'll start to see a lot of commonality
between characters.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I like having you on, because you pull from so many different things, and sometimes it's very easy for me to see that and chime in on my stuff.
Over all the years, I mean, a lot of this stuff is in my head, but a lot of this stuff, a lot of these details, like you have to, I mean, you only have so much room, I think, in your the memory that you use on a regular basis. And at a certain point, things start to slip into the background,
Yes.
And it's and like oftentimes we'll have these conversations here, and then when we get off, and I'll be like, oh, I should have mentioned that.
Every time I record, I think.
Dude, we can't. The information is so vast that we're just like picking up pieces to like look through this ancient mist to try to have an understanding. It's it's fun stuff though, man.
That's even real quick, just even to go back to what we were saying before we started recording with like you in painting. How you said you could sit there for 10 or 12 hours, and we're talking like a flow state or a type of meditation.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think maybe when you get into those things, that's when you are kind of able to kind of slip back and maybe find those things that passed you before that you thought you didn't remember. I think you can start tapping into that, and that's where these ideas that you're like, where did this come from? Well, I knew it already. It was just in a forgotten closet in my brain.
Yeah.
I just happened to remember it and forgot I had that idea.
Right.
Who knows? But
and I think there intrinsically is something that creative type people tap into. And whether you want to call that the Akashic record, whether you want to call that, the books of the Seraphim. I mean, it's like Philip K. Dick talks about, there's actually a waveform that's coming backwards through time that's like healing all of time. And it's like, it's making adjustments in all the miscellaneous actions and characters, because as a being outside of time, if you know how time runs, then if you work backwards through time, then you can create equity within time, right? So, are we tapping into some cosmic galactic, or are we tapping into our own subconscious? And does that come down to genetic memory? I mean, might we have all of the memory of the cosmos, as above, so below, as without, so within? Might we have all the memory of the cosmos like in us already? And like the Greeks talk about the idea that we're not learning anything, we're only remembering, It's it gets interesting, man.
Yeah. I was gonna say, sorry, sometimes like things that you find yourself in that flow state might be stuff from a past life or ancestral memory that you're just like, you just tap into that more easily than other activities, and that's why it's appealing to you. Yeah, right.
And you got to wonder how much the idea of depending upon what zodiac sign you're born into relates to the type of energies that you have, relates to the type of energies you tap into. It's like this beautiful like cosmic clock that like, in what is it, the Bhagavad Gita, basically when the human comes into being, they're like, you are the grand device. Like you're the one that sets time in motion. Like it's because of you that all this is happening, So it's like just interesting to think about what reality is and how magical we really are, and like what creation is, and like, it's what do they say? There's more space between the atoms that make up solid things than there is the atoms that are the solid things. And how do those atoms know they're supposed to be that thing, other than us perceiving it to be that thing? It's you really have to, when you start thinking in mystical terms, you really have to wonder what this beautiful creation is.
I've even seen that done with music. If there wasn't spaces between notes, would it really be music?
Right.
It would just all be one long sound.
Right. The negative space is just as valuable.
Yes.
I was just going to say that within art, one of the things that I learned early on was you don't draw the thing, you draw the negative space around the thing, and that will create the thing itself.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Totally right. That's like like dark matter almost, if you think about it.
Yeah.
And didn't Michelangelo say something like that about sculpting?
Oh,
like he takes away he just lets like the creation come forth and just takes away what's not necessary.
Right.
Something like that.
It's
Well, thank you very much, Robby.
Yeah.
It's always a banger to have you on, and in an episode I have to listen to multiple times myself.
I'll go back and listen to it for sure, man.
Yeah. You want to plug your stuff again? Just let everybody know where they could find your podcast and your art and whatever social media you want to plug.
Yeah. Like I said, I'm out there. If you just Google RMarxArt. Also check out my Etsy page. It's RMarxArt. And if you want to support me, that's a good way to do it. And then also I have the Meta Mindcast, METTA Mindcast, where I'm basically playing these interviews I'm doing as well as some of my own personal recordings.
Awesome.
Yep.
Definitely go check that out. The links are in the bottom for him and all of his stuff. And Teresa, would you like to plug your show again?
Yeah, so people can hear more from me on the Spiritual Gangsters podcast, which is, on all major platforms and YouTube, and also on Instagram, which will be in the link down below in the description.
Awesome. Thank you very much. And it will be inside my link tree as well for, all her stuff, like, she said. Will all be in my link tree. Robby's stuff will be in the bottom. Next week will be part 3. And then I think after that, there will be like another guest, a 2-part series. But then after that, finally, there will be a series that me, Teresa, and somebody else will be going into the chakras. So that will be more of a typical type of occult rejects where there will be 3 people covering a topic. So just to let people know, this isn't turning into all guests. It's just I needed some guests to have time to cover topics. So that's also a little bit of what's coming in the future. So if you haven't heard the first one, I highly suggest go back, listen to part 1 of the Mysteries of Egypt with Robby Marx. Then listen to this one, and there will be a third out next week. Again, Robby, I can't thank you enough for coming on. Like I say it all the time, I love having you on. Plethora of information and just great talks, and just, it's great for me just to think. You mention things that bring me back to ideas that I've had, and I'm like, oh, okay, here's another way of looking at it. So I love that stuff.
Right.
And it just seems to spiderweb and tie into things that, all over the place. And I hope that does that for the listeners as well. That is the end of another Occult Rejects and Friends. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.